Joining me here for this story, we have Mrs. Rose, and we have out of view our lovely Pomeranian Pip-Pip. The Singing Tree and the Talking Bird. Once there was a very curious king who eavesdropped at the windows of his subjects. A certain merchant had 3 daughters, and one day the king heard these maidens conversing with their father. One said, "I wish I were married to the king's caterer." The second daughter said, "If only the king's body servant would take me for his wife." And the third daughter said, "And I should like to be married to the king himself. I would bear him 2 sons and 1 daughter." Some time later, the king fulfilled their wishes. He married the eldest daughter to his caterer, the second daughter to his body servant. And the youngest daughter he took to wife himself. He lived happily with his wife, and we have Philip, who I'll introduce you to because he is loves to chew fingers and to play, and he's not very interested in stories, but he likes to be nearby. He lived happily with his wife, and she became pregnant. When her time came, she began to have labor pains. The king wanted to send for the midwife of the city, but the king's sister-in-law said, "Why send for a midwife? We ourselves can do what is necessary." When the queen gave birth to a son, these midwives told the king that his wife had given birth to a puppy. Put the newborn baby in a box and dropped it in the pond in the king's garden. The king became enraged at his wife and wanted to have her shot. But visiting kings dissuaded him from this, arguing that a first offense should be forgiven. So the king forgave her, postponing punishment against a second time. A year later, the queen again became pregnant and bore a son. This time, her sisters told the king that she had given birth to a kitten. The king became even more enraged and wanted to put his wife to death. But he was again dissuaded after many entreaties and postponed punishment against a third time. In the language of the Psyche, the visiting kings are other human beings. And what's happening is the king, the witness within each person, is listening to the desires of his own heart and granting the wishes. And as is always the case, the youngest daughter is the symbol of innocence, that portal of beauty from which all life springs. And it is the older relatives in the power structure, the one that's always trying to create war or to lie to the ego about what's really going on, that conspires to have the innocent one put to death. And this comes out of a deep envy and rage on the part of the sisters of the king, those parts that do not have as much power as they want. They are not the king. And so because the king's happiness and the king's glory and the king's joy always comes from the queen, from the daughter, from the youngest one, from the innocence inside the psyche. It is the conspiration of some of the more cynical parts within the psyche to condemn innocence to death so that nothing is left but themselves. But this also drives the kingdom into the ground. Then the queen became pregnant for a third time and bore a beautiful daughter. The sisters reported to the king that his wife had given birth to God knows what. The king became more enraged than before, had gallows erected, and wanted to hang his wife. But some kings who had come from other countries to visit him said to him, "Rather build a chapel next to the church and put your wife in it. Whoever goes to Mass is to spit in her face." The church is the culture, and spitting into the face is to dishonor the face of innocence, to shame and blame the innocent part in each one of us for the cynicism, for the betrayals of the older parts that, much like the jealousy and rage of an older woman directed towards a young beauty, the jealousy and rage of the parts of us that must grow accustomed to our world, that must play a role in building a life, which is hard work. You see, the joy of innocence, of kindness, of laughter, of holding, this comes easily. But the arduous work of sustaining a dominant and chauvinistic culture takes work, hard work. And the parts of us that we ask to play the role to maintain that system are always envious of grace, bitter and jealous of grace. The king followed this advice, and people not only spat in the queen's face, but hurled at her whatever they had in their hands, loaves of bread or cakes. As for the babies brought into the world by the queen and dropped by her midwives into the pond, As for the babies brought into the world by the queen and dropped by her midwives into the pond, the king's gardener took them into his house and brought them up. These children of the king grew not by the year, but by the month, not by the day, but by the hour. The princes became handsome youths, such as no mind can imagine nor pen describe, and the princess was such a beauty that she took one's breath away. We also see the irony that it's not only a lie about what is born in that third energy in the marriage of the king, of the part in the conscious mind that decides our lives. The marriage with the sacred feminine gives birth to sheer magic. And they came of age and asked the gardener to allow them to build a house outside the town. The gardener gave them his permission. They built a fine big house and began to live happily. The brothers loved to catch hares. One day they went hunting, and the sister remained at home alone. A little old woman came to the house and said to the maiden, "Your house is comfortable and beautiful, but you lack 3 things." The princess asked her, What do we lack? It seems to me that we have everything." The aged woman said, "This is what you lack: the talking bird, the singing tree, and the water of life." The brothers returned from the hunt, and the sister went out to meet them and said, "My brothers, we have everything except 3 things." The brothers asked her, "What do we not have, little sister?" She said, "We do not have the talking bird, the singing tree, nor the water of life." The elder brother began to beg her, "Little sister, give me your blessing. I will go forth to get these marvels, and if I die or am killed, this is how you will know it. I will thrust this penknife into the wall. When blood begins to drip from the knife, it will be a sign that I am dead." He left, and having walked for a long time, he came to a wood. A little old man sat on a tree, and the prince asked him, "How can I get the talking bird, the singing tree, and the water of life?" The man gave him a little spool and said, "Follow this spool wherever it rolls." The spool began to roll, and the prince followed it. It rolled up to a high mountain and vanished from sight. The prince started to climb up the mountain, reached a point halfway to the top, and then suddenly vanished as well. At his house, blood at once dripped from his penknife, and the sister said to the younger brother that their elder brother had surely died. The younger brother said to her, "Now I will go, little sister, to get the talking bird, the singing tree, and the water of life." She gave him her blessing, and he left. After having walked for a long time, he came to a wood. A little old man sat on a tree, and the prince asked him, "Little grandfather, how can I get the talking bird, the singing tree, and the water of life?" The little old man said, "Here is a spool for you. Follow it wherever it rolls." The old man threw the spool. It began to roll, and the prince followed it. It rolled up to a high mountain and vanished from sight. The prince started climbing the mountain, reached the halfway point, and suddenly vanished too. The sister waited him for many years, and still he did not come back. Then she said, "My second brother too must have died." And she went herself to get the talking bird, the singing tree, and the water of life. She walked for some time, a short time or a long time, and came to a wood. On the tree there sat a little man, and she asked him, "Little grandfather, how can I get the talking bird, the singing tree, and the water of life?" See, these are interesting characters, and one of the things that we see here is that the psyche splits itself into many personas. And one persona learns from the other persona's adventure. In other words, there's a sacrifice. 2 brothers have vanished. They've been frozen. But the psyche has not been frozen. Just 2 parts of the psyche. And another part is learning from the adventures of the first 2 parts. The little old man answered, "You cannot get them. Cleverer persons than you have tried, but they have all perished. The maiden still begged him. And we're dealing with the feminine part here, so it's a different element. Sometimes what the sun can warm and liquefy, the ice cannot warm and liquefy. Sometimes what the ice can harden and crystallize, the sun cannot. There's different parts of the psyche, and the trick is finding the right lubricant, the right recipe and energy signature that releases the momentum of the life cycle. Please tell me, she said, and the little old man said to her, here is a spool. Follow it. A thread. A line. If you will follow a single thought, a single emotion, all the way to its completion, it'll take you in a circle. It'll take you to any point on the circle you want to go. After some time, a short time or a long time, this spool rolled up a high mountain. The maiden began to climb it, and she heard voices shouting at her. Whither are you going? We shall kill you. We shall devour you. But she kept on climbing and climbing. She came to the top of the mountain, and there sat the talking bird. The maiden took this bird and asked it, tell me where I can get the singing tree and the water of life. The bird said, go over there. She came to the singing tree. In this tree all kinds of birds were singing. She broke a branch off it and went on further. She came to the water of life, drew a little pitcher of it to take it home. She began to climb down the mountain and sprinkled it with the water of life. Suddenly her brothers jumped up and said, ah, little sister, we have been asleep a long time. You could say that when the feminine finds its song, finds its voice, and it leads to the water of life, and as the feminine blesses the landscape, the environment, those trapped in that environment are released. Much like when warm water is poured on a glacier, sometimes it reveals the corpses of those who have been frozen decades before, mythological sense being brought to life. Ah, little sister, we have been asleep a long time. Yes, brothers, were it not for me, you would have slept here forever. And she added, I have got the talking bird, the singing tree, and the water of life. The brothers were overjoyed. They went home and planted the singing tree in their garden. It spread out over the whole garden, and the birds sang on it in various voices. One day the brothers went hunting and happened to meet the king. He liked these hunters and asked them to come and see him. They said, we shall ask our sister's permission. If she grants it, we will certainly come. They returned home from the hunt. The sister met them and attended them joyfully. Her brothers said to her, give us permission, little sister, to visit the king. He graciously asked us to come. The princess gave them permission, and they went to visit the king. This is an interesting part of the story because what these masculine faces of self are saying, that if they check in with the joy of the inner feminine, they reference their path choosing to be bound by her suggestions, that these are parts of the psyche that listen and defer and serve in that way the feminine. The king received them cordially and invited them to feast with him. They spoke to the king and asked him to visit them in turn. After some time, the king came to them, and they received him most hospitably and showed him the singing tree and the talking bird. The king was amazed and said, "I am king, and yet I do not have these things." Then the sister and brothers said to him, "But we are your children." The king learned the whole truth, was overjoyed, and stayed with them forever. He freed the queen from the chapel, and they lived together for many years in great happiness.